Alright, so we'll just talk a little bit about heat mapping and geodesic voxel binding in Maya 2015, but in 2014 we still have heat map available as well. So this is just the standard skinning from the previous tutorial, and you can see that this finger is collapsing a little bit. So how can we fix that? Well, we'll just come in here and we'll come in skin, detach skin. Now also notice that there's a lot of extra tools down here in 2015. They've changed things around a little bit to better. If you're in 2014, you have to go to edit smooth skin, and then all these options will sort of open up. So let's come into smooth bind, and we need to come into selected joints. So we need to select the joints, which are all these guys here. There they are. And this time, instead of going bind method closest distance, we want to come down to heat map method here. So let's just do that. Now everything else is kind of the same, and we can just go bind skin with selecting the actual mesh, of course. And of course that's already got skinning on it. Skin, detach skin. And we need to skin it at the bind pose, which is at frame 0 or frame 1 on this one. So I'll do that again. It's like that. Bind skin. Okay. So now when we scrub through up here, you'll see that solved a lot of our problems with this skin weighting here. And in fact, the binding on this is remarkably good. It's sort of eating into the hand a little bit. That's probably because these joints are not sort of parented to each other. So that's just something that is an issue with the rig, not an issue with our skinning. But you can see that that finger is definitely doing a much better job, and a really lovely job actually. We might not have to do much skin weighting to fix that up at all. So you can see with the heat map skinning, you get a much better, smarter version direct out of the box. Now, a couple of things about heat map skinning. One is it actually moves the points around, so I'll show you guys how to deal with this later. But as we can see here, I'm just going to frame on the side view here, come into this hull mode. Now this is a perfectly symmetrical object. You can come right in here and we can see that these two vertices are not in the same place anymore, and they're at either ends, but they're not in the same place, and they should be. And we can see this very clearly if we come back into that right view, zoom right up into there, and then go skin, detach skin. Just watch some of these vertices shift. There they go, they all shift back into this perfect sort of alignment. So that's something that we have to sort of take care of when we're doing heat mapping and geodesic voxel binding. Which I'll show you a solution to that in following tutorial. But in this tutorial, let's just have a look at how these work. So continuing on with the heat map method, coming back, select these joints again, just bring up our joints so we can see them. Sorry, we do have isolate select on, so you can just select those. Maybe I'll select those together, and we can come in again and go skin, smooth binds options. And this time we're doing that default. Now you do have this heat map fall off here, which is basically a slider of how heavily weighted you want or how smooth you want this to be. So let's just go all the way down to 0 and just hit bind skin. Make sure you're at the bind pose when you bind skin. And as you can see here, let's go to one of these fingers. Now what it's done is actually changed this to be a lot smoother. So instead of that finger as it was looking before, and I'll even come around this side to where we had it. In fact, that's fine. Let's just stay over this side. You can see it's become a little bit more sausagey rather than having these like bumps here, and it's smoothing between the forms of that finger there. So I'll show you the contrast to that. So let's just go back here, skin, detach the skin, do all this again, select those joints. Skin, bind skin, and we want to go heat mapping, and this time we'll go the other end of the spectrum. So heat map fall off 1, bind the skin, come up here, and now when we move these, you can see that that finger has stayed much more chunky. It's much more solid and what the finger might do, and you can see some sort of errors appearing here where that's actually screwing up a little bit. So it's sort of like either the verts are 1 or either on 100% to a joint, or they're not. So that's just a little bit about that slider. I find the defaults are pretty good, so let's just go skin, detach skin, go back to that, skin, bind, skin, smooth bind, edit, reset settings. Now I always change that to 3, just the max influences, and selected joints of course we need to be on, and closest to heat map. So this default value of 0.68 is usually pretty good. Alright, now in some cases this heat mapping won't work, and one of those cases is if we extrude out an edge here and we're actually creating some what's called non-manifold geometry. That's when there's no volume inside of the mesh. We can come in now and select all these joints, and now try to, I'll delete history on that. Now we'll select all the joints and select this mesh, and now I'll try to bind this here with just those settings. And you'll see it comes up with an error and it says blah blah blah, non-manifold vertices, use mesh, blah 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 blah. So it doesn't like this sort of a mesh, and really you shouldn't have these in your meshes anyway, so it's a good thing that it gives you a warning, but it just won't work. So make sure you don't have non-manifold geometry. Also, I believe that when we have multiple meshes, so let's just bring this up, scale it up a bit and show it. So we've got another cube here. What happens is this sort of method really likes to have the joints inside the mesh like that. So if you were to skin maybe not that object but this one, it's going to have a little bit of difficulty, so just make sure that the joints are all inside the mesh. The other thing is, if those two joints were combined, I believe, or if they're separate meshes, this method doesn't like to do multiple shells, so it will have a hard time doing this. It sort of fails because it does not contain any influences defined inside mesh volume. So there's a lot of errors with this heat mapping. It only works when you've got a really nice sort of example like these joints all inside these arms here. So the way that Autodesk has got around this is by introducing in 2015 this other method, which is called heatGeodesic. It's got this really crazy name. So selected joints, all the same, classic heat map, come down into geodesic voxel. So it's got a really crazy name, and we can come into this and see what it does. So now I'm going to come in and maybe grab one of these edges and extrude it up like that. We're just going to keep it to the defaults, and then try and reskin this arm. So select all the joints, select the mesh, and then hit apply. Now that's already got a skin cluster on it, so let's just take that off. Detach skin. And this mesh, hit apply. Now it takes a little bit longer, just a little bit of work that it needs to do, so it's doing that as well. And you can see that this has actually worked quite okay. So it's just something about that, and you can see that it's not really coming across and influencing that too much, maybe a little bit, but it's done a pretty smart sort of a skinning algorithm as happened with the heat mapping. So it does a slightly different version. I find the heat mapping a little bit better, so if it works in heat mapping, then you can go ahead and do that. And this method will work with more complex geometry and with multiple shells. So it's just a fallback, in my opinion, compared to heat mapping. It's like when heat mapping doesn't work, let's use the good old geodesic voxel. Now this has also got a fall off slider, so it's a bit like the heat mapping one. You can also work on your resolution, and the way that this works is it actually converts the mesh into these things called voxels. So they're just sort of like points in space. A little bit of tech there, you can have a look, but that's how accurate you want your mesh. So if you've got a very dense mesh or you want very accurate results, you might want to put that resolution up a little bit, but I've found 256 works pretty okay in most situations. But up to 1024, it will take a long time to generate the mesh. Okay, there we go. So there's a little bit about heat mapping and geodesic voxel. It's really good if you can use heat mapping. It does move the points around, so we're going to have a bit of a workaround for that. But in many cases, I will still use just the standard closest point bind method in Maya.